there are consequences from that kind of behavior. There is a reason that over the last 5 years, people have flocked and gravitated to the Black Channel. There's a reason why they come here. There's a reason why other people entertain them. But this is the only place that enlightens and informs. And we're the only one that does that because we are the only place that tells you what is coming before it gets here, before it even gets started. We are the only place that reminds you that the past is the best indicator of the future. The tough truth of it all, brothers and sisters, the tough truth of it all is that white supremacy broke us a long time ago, and we haven't come to grips with the fact that happened, that occurred. We kind of try to tell ourselves it didn't happen simply because we're still quote unquote alive. We take that as some sort of victory. And the problem is that our continued survival is not something that we are even responsible for. And because we did not cause it or bring it into being, we can't sit here and congratulate about it. It is actually, as Dr. Umar Johnson puts it in 7 a.m., a fluke of history. And we have been greedily, dishonestly, fraudulently been attempting to claim responsibility for things that we have not even accomplished. We come from now 3 generations of black people who, at best, were negligent in their duties and at worst were cowardly. You can take whichever one of those you would prefer, but it is the reality. At best. At best. Earlier this year, I had told you all that California is done. I had passed judgment, pronounced sentence on California that it is done. There'll be a few black folk who will be able to make ends out of it. There always are. But as a place for us to aggregate power, California is done. The math no longer works. Black people have shrunken to such a minuscule population in California that they have been passed by all the other groups now. You lack the sufficient numbers of black people who have the will to survive in California. You have a few. But that is exactly what you have, is a few. It's not like they have a bunch of people that they work with out there. They only have a couple of people that they can join up with, and that's all. But as a people, as a force, you don't have enough people who have the will to survive out there. And tonight, I am just about ready. We are just about prepared to pass final judgment on Detroit. We're just about there. We're just about there. The news came in yesterday from the Associated Press by Ed White. A judge on Friday approved Detroit's plan to get out of bankruptcy. ending the largest public filing in U.S. history and launching the city into a turnaround that will require discipline after years of corruption, budget-busting debt, and an exodus of residents. Detroit is cutting the pensions of general retirees by 4.5%, erasing $7 billion of debt, and promising to spend $1.7 billion, as billion with a B, $1.7 billion, to demolish scores of dead buildings, improve public safety, that means more police, improve public safety, and upgrade basic services, among other key steps. Brothers and sisters, you can only be warned for so long. Before you tell yourselves that you're going to celebrate this, because a lot of you are uneducated about these things, you're uninformed, you don't know, and you're living in fear and denial. You want to believe that a savior is going to come down and everything's going to be all right. You want to believe that you can be as dumb as possible, that you can be as ignorant as possible, uneducated as possible, IQ as low as dirt, and that you will still be able to not only survive but thrive if you are willing to accept enough poverty. And we have warned you here that poverty is not a road to more poverty. Poverty is a road to extinction. The story goes on to say, the case concluded in just under 16 months, lightning speed by bankruptcy standards. The success was largely due to a series of deals between Detroit and major creditors, especially retirees who agreed to accept smaller pension checks after the judge said they had no protection under the Michigan Constitution. Retirees who agreed to accept smaller pension checks after the judge said they had no protection under the Michigan Constitution. Most of these retirees are old black folk. Old black folk who spent their lives spitting on their children and their grandchildren. Old black folk who, after they got, as Tariq so affectionately calls it, the butter biscuits of integration, the ultimate butter biscuit of integration, that once they got that pat on the head, they danced their jig, they celebrated to their friends, we finally got master to pat us on the head. We done, y'all. We done. We's done. Dance this jig here. Dance this jig here, Clementine. We's done. We's done. What about the children? Let them build what let them get by what they gonna get by on. You let them go. Black people are the only people on earth who routinely sabotage their own children. We're the only people on earth who have made it a culture of sabotaging our own and undermining our own children. We are the only people on earth who do that. And it is despicable, inexcusable, and unforgivable. That they got control and they got all these good jobs and all these fancy pensions, and then they did nothing for their children. Meanwhile, Arabs are getting off the planes. Meanwhile, Hispanics are crossing the border. Meanwhile, the British and the Irish and the Greeks and everybody else, the Indians and the Asians, are coming across the plains, and they are building a physical and economic legacy in Detroit for their children. But the old black folk of Detroit actually want you to respect them, and there are a lot of you out there who have enough cognitive dissonance, which basically means denial, that you are sitting here trying to honor people who not only did nothing for you but left you helpless and hopeless. They could have prevented every bit of this. They could have prevented every bit of this. The city of Detroit is filled with a bunch of Stevens. And if you ever saw the movie Django Unchained, you know who Steven is. A bunch of impotent, cowardly, buck-dancing, subservient Negroes who see white supremacy for what it is and go back to picking the cotton, because in their minds, picking the cotton from Massachusetts is more honorable than building something for their own children. They have love and affection for Massachusetts. The Detroit police busting their heads open, they actually like that. And no, I'm still on topic. The civil rights generation actually likes the police busting them over the heads, because nothing makes them happier than trying to convert white bigots to being their friends, because they suffer from such a pathetic inferiority complex that getting beaten up by non-black people, particularly by white supremacists, getting beaten up by white supremacists in their minds, getting beaten on by white supremacists is a status symbol. This is how sick they are. This is how sick they are, that in their minds, getting beaten up by white supremacists is actually a status symbol among their group. I'm not joking, and it's not hyperbole. It is actually a status symbol among their kind. They are actually proud of it. So you as the children, you are actually the enemy. As far as they are concerned, you are the enemy. You are the enemy because you stand in the way of the butter biscuit. You stand in the way of appeasement. You stand in the way of white acceptance. You stand in the way of all the Negro trinkets they've been lined up for so long. You stood in the way of that. So they used you as the sacrificial lamb to placate and appease white supremacy. By handicapping you, by disabling you, by leaving you impoverished and destitute, that was their pagan offering. Their pagan sacrifice to white supremacy. Master Charlie, we ain't gonna cause no troubles now. Don't you worry now. We ain't gonna cause you no trouble. This child over here, I made sure I spank him and beat him good. I told him to choose the man, and he needs to make sure he bow down to you now. He's not gonna build nothing, and you best believe I ain't gonna give him nothing to be fighting you with. No sir. No sir. Ain't nobody gonna be fighting you, Mr. Charlie. You just run this thing like you want to, Mr. Duggan. Mr. Charlie. With all those black females standing behind him and his black female chief of staff as they dance the jigaboom dance. But you don't wish to hear that because a lot of you are now infected with the virus of cowardice. You have accepted your parents' cowardly legacy, and now you are taking up where they left off. And just as they defend the white supremacy that has decimated and victimized them, you now defend the black cowardice that decimated and victimized you. Generations of cowards who refuse to face the reality because the reality is just so horrible. And it is just so easy to stay weak. Now, all those people who buck danced and jigaboomed are waking up, and they were told that Now their retirement checks are going to be cut. Now, as I explained to you all before, and I've told you about this before, PBS Frontline did a fantastic piece. You can go to their website and go see it. They did a fantastic piece about bankruptcy from a few years back. And it's actually on their website. You can see it. It was dealing with specifically, I think it's called the end of retirement. Yeah, I believe that's the end of retirement. And it talks about United Airlines and how United Airlines went to court and filed bankruptcy, but they didn't file bankruptcy for just anything. They filed bankruptcy for one specific purpose. They went to court to file bankruptcy in order to get the court to reclassify their biggest obligation, their biggest financial obligation, their pensions. Because you see, in corporate America, what Mr. Fish last night, who claimed there's no white privilege, but yet, did you notice that Mr. Fish would not tell you all what the plan was to overthrow the white overlords at the top? Did you notice he never said a word about, okay, these are the white guys at the top who run things, and here's what we're gonna do about them. You notice at no time did he invite us to take any type of action against them, nor did he suggest what that action should be. Did you all notice that, by the way, last night? In everything he said, he never said what the action should be. Just thought I'd throw that in there for you. At no time does he ever mention that. United Airlines filed bankruptcy because they wanted to get the court to do something that had never been done before. They wanted to get the court to say that their pensioners, they wanted the court to classify the people that they were paying pensions to already, not people who they were going to pay pensions to in the future. See, that's what government is trying to do. They wanted to get the court to authorize that they could reduce the payments to current retirees, people who were currently living on their retirement pensions from United. They wanted to get the courts to reclassify the pensioners as just another creditor. Just like Boeing, that Boeing would be a creditor, that the banks that they got the loans from to buy the planes from Boeing or Lockheed Martin or whoever would just be another creditor, and that they would be covered in their restructuring of their payments to their creditors. And then the court said yes. The court told them that yes, your pensions are just another creditor, and the pensioners have to get in line with everybody else. And what this was intended to do, and succeeded in doing, was forcing the pensioners, both current and future, to accept drastic cuts to their benefits and drastic cuts to their pension payments. So much so that many of them had to go back to work and get another job because their pensions were cut. In the ensuing decade, you would see this strategy used again and again. Most notably by General Motors. General Motors filed bankruptcy because after decades of the corporate coffers being raided by the white corporate chieftains, these were not black men. There were no black men doing this. So after decades of these corporations not putting any money into their retirement pensions. They were supposed to be taking your money and putting it in the retirement funds. And instead, the CEOs and the boards of directors were off buying themselves beach houses for their trophy wives and their mistresses, and whatever other sexual deviancies they wanted to go on around the world, by the way, many of them illegal. That's what they used your pension money for. And there was nothing in the pension funds. Your unions didn't protect you. They didn't do anything. But remember, black men are the enemy, by the way. Just remember, after all that, it's black men who are the problem. Just remember that. The white victim, they are white victims of the black oppressor, is what Mr. Fish wanted you to believe. That they were white victims of the black oppressor. So after they raided the pensions and there was nothing left, or there were insufficient funds to pay out their pensions, or at least they claimed there are, first thing they wanted to do was go after the pension payments. After they got the bankruptcy ruling, the bankruptcy ruling at United, their CEO got a huge bonus. That's the way these things always work. The CEOs will take no pay cuts. The board of directors will take no pay cut. They will take no pay cuts. The rest of you will take a haircut. Some of you might take a head cut. They will take nothing. But remember, the black men are the problem. Well, now it's come to government. Detroit has now gone the exact same route, and the judge has told the pensioners, all those folk drawing their pensions today, that you are not protected. You are just another creditor. That's all. You are just another creditor. Now, let me tell you who's crying about this. All the black folk who worked in Detroit government. All the civil rights Negroes who had their cars and their bell bottoms and their feather hats, who bought their little houses that they thought were so fancy at the time and now are in the worst parts of town. Those are the folk who are crying. Now, let me tell you who is not crying about this. Let me tell you who's not crying and who's not complaining. Who's not crying and who's not complaining. The Asians, the Arabs, the Latinos, all the Euros. They're not complaining about this at all. They're not crying about this. They're saying, yeah, chop it. They are not complaining at all. Those of you out there who watched your parents dance the jig, Sambo up and down the block, and you have been too cowardly to call your parents out on their malfeasance and their treason toward you, well, guess what? Now they're starting in on them. And by the way, they're just starting, by the way. Remember that you were warned here from this microphone years ago. The story goes on to say no significant critics were left by early October. Bond insurers with more than $1 billion at stake repeatedly argued for the sale of valuable art, but dropped that plea and settled for much less. It took more than 2 years for a smaller city, Stockton, California, to get out of bankruptcy. San Bernardino, a California city even smaller than Stockton, still is operating under Chapter 9 protection more than 2 years after filing. Rhodes had to accept Detroit's remedy or reject it in full, not pick pieces. His appointed expert, Marty Kopax of Boston, said it was skinny, quote, skinny, but feasible. And she linked any future success to the skills of the mayor and city council and a badly needed overhaul of technology at City Hall. Black folk have run Detroit city government now for over 3 decades. We could have turned it into the single most sophisticated, powerful, efficient, and modern city structure on Earth. We could have made South Korea and Tokyo, Japan, look absolutely pitiful in comparison. We could have been state of the art in Detroit. We could have been. But you see, black people did not want leadership in Detroit. There has always been a titanic struggle in black society between the ignorant and the intelligent. That is what it all comes down to the people who chew their toenails versus the people who can read and write. The people who want to buy tennis shoes when they don't have food versus the people who can be bothered to learn how to count. And it has been that way since before the slave ships, on the plantations, after the plantations. That is the struggle. That there are those of us who wish to live our lives as servants, pets, and children versus those of us who wish to live our lives as adults, free men, and free women. That's what it is. Those who wish to live their lives on a subhuman level versus those who wish to live their lives as men, as people. That is who the battle is between now. And you have to choose a choice. Now, you either join the intelligent or by default you're with the ignorant. It goes that way. There is no middle ground because the ignorant are the apathetic. And if you're doing nothing, you're with them. So you've made a choice either way. But in Detroit, we have elected failure after failure, fraud after fraud, liar after liar, because they told you what you wanted to hear. That was why you went along with it. You've gone along with it because they told you what you wanted to hear. You wanted to be lied to, and they gave you that. The story goes on to say the most unusual feature of the plan is an $816 million pot of money funded by the state, foundations, philanthropists, and the Detroit Institute of Arts. The money will patch holes in Detroit's pension funds, prevent even deeper cuts to retirees, and avert the sale of city-owned art at the world-class museum. They are just determined to hold on to that cultural legacy of theirs with the artwork, aren't they? Meanwhile, black people give away our cultural legacy at every turn because we see everything that we have as simply something available to be sold at a fire sale to get a pat on the head. We see everything that we have as just something as a bargaining chip to get a pat on the head. Black people are the only people on earth who have something in their minds that is more valuable than money, and that is white acceptance. White acceptance means more to black people in the past, present, and future than anything else. Now, we better try to change that future part, but for most black people today, they would sell their souls, and they do, every day, to get acceptance. As long as they can get acceptance from the predominant society, they are done. They don't care what happens after that moment. They have reached the promised land. It says, Rhodes acknowledged the 4.5% pension cut could cause, quote, severe hardship for many retirees who average less than $20,000 a year. But he said the solution, quote, borders on miraculous, especially when the city at one time was proposing reductions of more than 20%. Now that would have hurt, because that would have meant they were going to knock off $4,000, which is 1/5 of that 20%. I mean, 1/5 of that $20,000. But we as black people have made it our goal that we are not going to take care of ourselves. We are going to be dependent upon other people to see to it that our futures are taken care of. And they're certainly taking care of you now, aren't they? They're certainly taking care of you now. So they dodged the bullet of being chopped down by $4,000 a year. They were able to dodge that bullet and bring it down to about $1,000 a year. Now, isn't that something where you are in a situation where you consider it to be a victory that your income is only going to go from $20,000 to $19,000 a year? The rich get richer and the poor are getting poorer. Because black people figured that if they could just get a good government job, to hell with the children, I've reached the promised land. And what they are finding out is that in their lifetimes, they will live to see the chickens come home to roost. They are living long enough to see the chickens come home to roost. They are celebrating losing 4.5%. They're celebrating that because it could have been 20, and I tell all of you that before it's over, it very well may be. The fact that they're getting cut by $1,000 now, they will be celebrating that if these people have their choice, because understand, they can always go back to the judge and petition for more. They can always go back to the judge and say the 4.5% is not enough. We need to take another 4.5%. They got you to agree to the 4.5 today. They will go back and try to get another 4.5. And you really don't have a choice, because if you don't accept it, the judge will simply swing the hammer. They call it a gavel, but it's actually a hammer. And when he does, you're finished. When he does, you're finished. Michigan Governor Rick Snyder, who I believe was just reelected, appointed Kevin Orr, his token, as emergency manager in March of 2013, giving him extraordinary authority to fix the city's finances. 4 months later, they agreed that bankruptcy was a drastic but necessary step. With more square miles than Manhattan, Boston, and San Francisco combined, Detroit didn't have enough tax revenue to reliably cover pensions, retiree health insurance, and buckets of debt sold to keep the budget afloat. The city has a population of 688,000 people, down nearly 30% from 2000, and an even longer descent from 1.2 million in 1980. But brothers and sisters, in the 1960s, Detroit's population was 1.7, 1.8 million people. So since 1970, they've gone from about 1.7 million people to less than half that. Detroit's population has fallen to less than half the size it was in 1970. Now listen to the last paragraph of the story here that the Associated Press writer Mr. Ed White, ironic, says here. Listen to this last paragraph he puts in here. Mayor Duggan, in office less than a year, is the fourth mayor since 2008, that's 6 years, when Kwame Kilpatrick resigned in office. A dreadful debt deal under Kilpatrick that locked Detroit into a high interest rate when rates were falling during the recession contributed to the bankruptcy. Kwame Kilpatrick, a young man, his mammy, was celebrating about her son being elected mayor of Detroit, and he thought that his only real responsibility in Detroit was to wear suits and to show up with his hood rat hoe girlfriends. And ultimately, that penchant, that obsession, that fixation with getting attention. He wasn't concerned about leading. He wasn't concerned about innovating. He wasn't concerned about a black legacy. He was concerned about black girls' draws and whatever else he was trying to take to bed in the mayor's office. Those were his priorities. And today, Kwame Kilpatrick is facing spending many, many years in prison. They're just taking him from one prison to another. And it's not justifiable in a lot of regards there. This is much stiffer than they do to other people. But let me tell you something. As a matter of honor and as a matter of karma, Kwame Kilpatrick is getting exactly what he deserves. He wanted to enable instead of going to war against the system that would ultimately imprison him, he decided to dance the jig, do the Sambo shuffle, laugh and joke with white supremacy. When Dr. Claude Anderson showed up in Detroit with a plan to revitalize Detroit and to lead the way of black empowerment, there was Kwame Kilpatrick to stand in the way. And now, Kwame Kilpatrick is receiving the wages of sin. He's collecting his wages. He took the Faustian bargain. He shook the hand of the devil. He signed away his soul. And now the devil has come to collect. Kwame Kilpatrick betrayed his people. And now Kwame Kilpatrick finds himself left to the tender mercies of Master Charlie. And Master Charlie is having no mercy. And I want you to take that as a cautionary tale. That many of you are walking the road of Kwame Kilpatrick. Many of you are dancing the jig, drinking from the cup that he did, that they did. And look where they are today. Look where they are today. As black people, we have a constant habit and have made a constant penchant of doing this. We tell ourselves that somebody else is going to come ride to our rescue, that we can be as dumb as we wish to be, and everything will just be quite fine. And you are finding out that that will not be the case. And tonight, brothers and sisters, I held this broadcast with you tonight. I read that article with you here tonight because I wanted to say to you that I am just about 90% of the way to declaring Detroit beyond saving. I'm almost to the point of declaring that Detroit is beyond salvaging. We're almost there. It's not going to be much longer. If I see this population number dip any lower than it already is, and depending on how this bankruptcy goes in the next 12 months, here's the problem, folks. Do you understand that they are going to spend $1 billion to see about demolishing buildings, among other things? Over $1 billion to demolish buildings and hire more cops. They said public safety. Now, if you're black, you should understand that the only real threat are black males. We want to get $1 billion to demolish old buildings that black folk used to live in and stay in. We want $1 billion to knock down the buildings black folk are in or were in, and to hire more police. So we want to knock down the buildings where black people no longer are, and we want police to regulate the black people who are still here. We want more police to regulate the black folk who are still here. That's what we want. Do you understand, brothers and sisters, that Detroit, this is not a bankruptcy? Brothers and sisters, what I just read to you is not a bankruptcy declaration. What I just read to you is a final solution. If we were a more honest people, we would simply accept it for what it is. What I just read to you is a final solution. The final solution to your black problem in Detroit. Who are you going to thank for this? Well, you can thank your parents. You can thank your grandparents. You can thank Barry Gordy. You can thank the people who would not support Dr. Claude Anderson, who spit on the prophets. You can thank them. Black people, we've played this game with people who are playing the game of annihilation with us. We are trying to figure out how to get a pat on the head from people who are trying to figure out how to annihilate us. And guess who's winning? Guess who's winning this? Brothers and sisters, as you all know, the Black Channel is the place that tells you the truth about these things. The Black Channel is the place that tells you the truth about these things. And as such, I am not going to waver from that sacred responsibility tonight. Detroit is just about over. The game is just about over. And you know what the killing part about it is? The game is just about over for you if the bankruptcy succeeds. If this bankruptcy filing succeeds in turning around the finances of Detroit, it is over for you. It is more likely that you will be decimated if this bankruptcy filing does turn around the city's finances than if it doesn't. If things simply proceed the way that they are, muddling, sluggish, a cesspool and a quicksand, if it continues on like that, you may have a chance. If the situation does turn around, it is much more likely that the game is already over for you. It's much more likely that the game is already over. Take a look at Brooklyn. Back in the 80s, you could buy those brownstones and those buildings back then in the 80s. I mean, you could buy them for pennies on the dollar back then. Try to do it today. After Giuliani and then another billionaire businessman, Michael Bloomberg, after they got done, It didn't take them a century to make Brooklyn uninhabitable for you. It took them 1 decade. From Rudy Giuliani to Michael Bloomberg. It took them a little over a decade to make it economically impossible. They erected the economic barriers to remove black people from New York in 10 years. It took them a decade to erect those barriers, and the barriers are moving you out. Harlem. I went to Harlem to go film 7 a.m. I went to Harlem. I walked through the place. I arrived early in the morning, and the only places I saw open were owned by Asians and Arabs. I am in supposedly the blackest part of New York, a historic haven for black people in New York, and all I saw was that was just the marketing. We call it the black part of New York, but it ain't nothing black about it. You don't own anything. You don't own anything. And I saw a bunch of black people walking the streets who were not interested in owning anything. And then as I traveled back to Midtown Manhattan, and for those of you who live in New York, you understand it. I mean, it's really just crossing the street to go from Midtown to Harlem, basically. It's basically crossing the street. And in my mind, visually, I could see it all. Those gigantic skyscrapers in Midtown. Those gigantic skyscrapers. 30 Rock. The GM building. Freedom Tower. I could see all of it. I could see it. And then I took a look to my left and there was Harlem. To my right were the skyscrapers, and to my left was Harlem. No skyscrapers, just a bunch of folk living and walking. And I visualized it as an incline. That Harlem was at the bottom and the skyscrapers were at the top of a hill, but that the skyscrapers had gotten so big, so voluminous, so large, so overcrowded on top of that hill that they were now about to topple and fall over and come rolling down the hill straight into Harlem. That they have used up all the valuable real estate in Midtown, and now the encroachment is going to begin of expanding out. You've gone up and down as far as you can go. The inevitable step is to start moving towards Harlem now. That the skyscrapers will begin to start getting built further and further towards Harlem. And when you build an $800 million skyscraper, that is going to skyrocket the real estate values for what, a quarter of a mile? At least. And I'm being generous. I'm probably being generous. The New York Times is already doing stories about how Brooklyn is becoming so overly gentrified at this point that even white folk are unable to afford to stay there, that they're being pushed out of Brooklyn. You see, they're going to focus on themselves, not on you. They're not going to say that this is gentrifying black people. They're just going to say gentrification, as if white people can actually be gentrified. As if this is not being aimed at black areas. Because it specifically names Bedford-Stuyvesant. These are the things that we have ignored for so long, and I am telling you all that the day of reckoning is here. From one place to another, from one side to another. You will no longer have the option or the luxury of ignoring this. And I'm saying to you that in Detroit, it's just about over. It's just about over in Detroit. You've just about lost it. It's just about time for us to give up hope. It's just about time, because the numbers are not there. The math isn't there. The math isn't there. You don't have the necessary numbers to sustain yourselves in Detroit anymore. And by necessary numbers, I'm referring to productive black people who own, control, and have something to pass down to their children. You don't have it in Detroit anymore. You don't have it. And now you are in a deadly situation where this mega rich investor, who they call the governor of Michigan, has no mercy. His goal is very clear: to remove black people. That is his goal. His goal is to remove black people and to replace them with individuals who are coming to do business and to build. But if you are a black person in the state of Michigan and you are not buying and building, as far as he is concerned, you are blight. As far as he is concerned, you constitute urban blight. As far as he is concerned. So in Detroit, it's just about over at this point. We can just about call the game at this point. I know earlier this week they had the midterm elections, but we can just about call the election in Detroit now. We can just about call the election. In the election of white supremacy versus black survival in Detroit, the election returns are coming in, and it appears that it's going to be white supremacy by a landslide. And brothers and sisters, I am going to announce to you tonight that this is the situation. This is the reality. This is what is happening. And this is good. That's right. I am telling you that this is good. Because you see, you can only warn a people that something is going to happen for so long until it finally does. And if it doesn't happen, you lose your credibility. We have been warned as a people, from Marcus Garvey to John Henrik Clark, that we must change. We were warned decade after decade, and black people have become a group of people who are led by the most ignorant among them. Black people are the only people who the ignorant among us lead, and the intelligent seek to imitate the ignorant. And that is where the fight is today. Those of us who no longer wish to idolize the ignorant. These are going to be the choices that we have to make now. The black people who have become comfortable with poverty, who have become happy with weakness, who aspire to be destitute. That's where the battle is today. And we have to make our decision whether or not we're going to go along with that. Because the day of reckoning is here. Brooklyn, Harlem, you're next. It will not require a bankruptcy filing. You are simply going to be priced out of existence. In California, the strategy is to bring in so many non-black people that they drown you. They have succeeded. California is not on the way to succeeding to drown black people. California has succeeded. It's over in California. They have succeeded. Mission accomplished. In Detroit, they see that black folk have the numbers and have the political might. So the Democrats, the white Democrats, Jennifer Granholm, passed the law that said that, well, we'll just overlook democracy. So that was what they did. Black folk voted for Jennifer Granholm and she passed the emergency finance manager law. But she never used it. And when she left office, she let the Republican, the white Republican, Rick Snyder in, and he said, thank you very much for that there hammer. And she said, you're quite welcome. Now go bash them niggers. And that was exactly what he did. That was exactly what he did. In Harlem and Brooklyn, they are not using immigrants and they're not using legislation. They are using their massive financial might to do it. In Washington, D.C., now do you see how many tactics they have? You thought that you could protect yourself if you just simply changed up. But there's a reason why we're going from place to place to place. And you say, well, okay, in California, okay, they brought in all these illegals and they're drowning us out. Okay, well, we'll just go to a place where we have superior numbers. Okay, we're going to run to Detroit. Run to Detroit. They went to Detroit. Well, okay, we got superior numbers here, so they can't use that illegals thing here, so we okay. Get back to dancing that jig. Yeah, dance the jig. What do you mean, emergency finance manager? What do you mean the city council doesn't have a vote anymore? What do you mean he's gonna just take our pensions? Okay, well, I'm in Harlem and Brooklyn, so we okay over here. We ain't gotta worry about illegals, and we don't have to worry about emergency finance managers and bankruptcy. We ain't gotta worry. What do you mean, Capitol building construction? Who the hell is that? Bloomberg building, what the hell? Silverstein construction? Trump investments? What the hell is what are all these bulldozers and cranes doing down the block? Every time that you are playing defense, you are playing defense and not even playing it very well. And everywhere you go, these guys are changing up the play on you. They have evolved at a frightening rate. And everywhere where you're going to try to make a stand, they're just changing up the strategy. In Washington, D.C., they are using a mixture of gentrification financially and ethnically. They're using a mixture in Washington, D.C. And in Atlanta, they're just using a slow burn. New Orleans has already fallen, as you all know. Did you see how we just did this big circle around the country? Did you see how we just did that? If you don't think the circle goes far enough, you want to go to Dallas and Houston, you want to take a look at those? If you don't think the circle has gone far enough, if you think that coming to New Orleans, well, we got a little stretch down there in Texas. Oh, really? Is that what you want to tell yourself? Have you been to Galveston lately? Have you been to Houston lately? The only thing Houston has they can talk about is Beyonce Knowles. Oops. Talk about your pawns of white supremacy. No, just keep treating this like a game. You keep treating this like a game. You go ahead and you do that. You know, there are plenty of black folk who are just no longer concerned with survival. Now, if you're one of the folk who's no longer concerned with survival, turn off this broadcast now. This really isn't the place for you. Brothers and sisters, this is the situation. But you know what? This is good. This is good because this is going to serve two purposes. Number one, it clears the field. It thins the herd from those who have decided that they are no longer interested in survival. It thins the herd. Number two, it's going to be the ultimate kick in the pants for those of you who have been wondering, should I get up now or should I wait? Should I get up now or should I wait? Well, let this be your wake-up call. You can no longer wait. You couldn't wait 10 years ago. You don't have the option of waiting. You don't have the option of waiting. Not any longer. If you ever truly did. We're just about prepared to declare rest in peace, Detroit. We're just about prepared to declare it. Because black people lack the money, the muscle, or the membership to be able to turn it around at this point. You will have black politicians that will continue to dwindle in number. And as we see more Arabs and Latinos flood into the area, they want to make whole immigration tunnels for them now. They want to make whole fast-track immigration tunnels for non-citizen entrepreneurs in Detroit. They want to make whole tunnels for you. You know why? Because black people in Detroit ain't building nothing. Black people in Detroit will not even get together and pool their money to make a grocery store. Something that they need. Black people are just standing around and looking. That Plantation Sambo syndrome. The Sambo syndrome, where you just stand around waiting for massa to give you instructions like a robot. And if he doesn't tell you to do it, then A, you don't see the value in it, and B, you don't see a reason to move. They are using all these mechanisms to clear the field. White supremacy already has its economic power in place. They are not concerned about more outside investors. Black people have nothing. And more to the point, you don't see them trying to gain nothing. Black women as a group have become experts at figuring out social programs. Not a damn finger being lifted to empower their sons. Black men as a group have become experts at maneuvering females into bed, not doing so well at being able to build anything for all these females they hope to bed. And that is why the standard of females that black men are willing to sleep with is as low as dirt, as low as grime and filth. Because a man who is unwilling to build anything of consequence cannot keep a female of consequence. We are going to make decisions to survive or decisions not to survive. Detroit, I think we can just about call it for you now. I think we can just about call it for you. Who's next? Who's next? And this concludes tonight's broadcast of the BlackChannel.net radio. I am your host, your brother, your humble servant, Black of Folk. And until next time, brothers and sisters from around the world, remember, black is the future. The future is uncompromising. Good night.